Suburban Chicago, July 4th. The humidity presses down like a physical weight, thick with the scent of charcoal and unvoiced resentment. My father stands by the grill, screaming at me to go live in the streets, to vanish into the failure he groomed me to be. He doesn't know the truth. My name is Riley Dawson, and the car I parked around the block costs more than his entire house. He thinks he is discarding a helpless daughter, but he is actually declaring war on a ghost who secretly owns his mortgage. They stole my past to fund a lie, so I bought their future to force the truth. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. The humidity in suburban Chicago on the 4th of July doesn't just make you sweat. It holds you down, pressing against your skin like a wet wool blanket you can't shake off. I sat in the driver's seat of a dented silver 2014 Honda Civic 2 blocks away from my parents' house, letting the air conditioning rattle against the dashboard. My hands were gripping the steering wheel tight enough to turn my knuckles white, a physical manifestation of the mental armor I was bolting into place. Just an hour ago, I had pulled my Porsche Panamera into the underground garage of my penthouse in the Loop and swapped keys with my assistant Sarah. She thought it was quirky that I liked to stay humble when visiting family. She didn't understand that driving a 6-figure car into the Dawson driveway wouldn't be a flex, it would be blood in the water. To the world, I was Riley Dawson, the invisible middle child working a dead-end IT job at a community college, fixing paper jams and resetting passwords for people who couldn't remember their mother's maiden name. In reality, I was the founder and CEO of Dawson Logic, a back-end logistics AI firm currently valued at just over $400 million. But my family didn't know that. They couldn't know that. If they knew, the dynamic of pity and disdain they fed on would vanish, replaced instantly by a parasitic hunger I wasn't ready to fight. I killed the engine and walked the remaining block. The smell of charcoal, lighter fluid, and burning meat hung heavy in the air. As I turned up the driveway, the tableau of my childhood was perfectly, painfully preserved. My father Frank stood by the massive stainless steel grill, a beer in one hand and a pair of tongs in the other, performing masculinity for the neighbors. He was laughing too loudly at his own joke, his chest puffed out. My mother Eleanor was fluttering around him, swatting at flies and nervously rearranging platters of corn that didn't need rearranging, her eyes darting around to ensure the neighbors were watching. And then there was Bella. My younger sister, the 26-year-old golden child, was holding court at the patio table. She was dressed in a pristine white sundress that somehow repelled the soot and grease of the barbecue, posing for a selfie with a glass of rosé she hadn't taken a sip of in 20 minutes. Bella was an influencer, an aspiring boutique owner, titles that sounded impressive until you looked at her balance sheet, which was entirely subsidized by Frank and Eleanor's retirement fund. "Look who finally decided to join the living," Frank bellowed as I opened the gate. The conversation stopped. All eyes turned to me. I wasn't greeted with hugs. I was greeted with an inspection. "Traffic was bad on the Kennedy," I lied, keeping my voice flat. Sure. Frank dismissed me, turning back to the grill. "Grab a burger, Riley. Try not to look so miserable. It's a party." I moved toward the cooler, feeling the familiar prickle of exclusion. It wasn't just that I was the black sheep. It was that I was the necessary prop for their stage play. They needed someone to be the failure, so Bella could shine brighter by comparison. "Riley, honey," my mother said, her voice dropping to that hushed, tragic whisper she used whenever discussing my life. "Are those the same jeans you wore last Christmas? You know Bella has some old things she was going to donate. Maybe you could look through them." I looked down at my jeans. They were vintage Japanese denim, hand-distressed, and cost $600. "I'm fine, Mom, thanks." I sat at the far end of the table, nursing a lukewarm soda. Bella smiled at me, that pitying, saccharine smile that never reached her eyes. "Don't be mean, Mom. It's hard to dress well on a support tech salary. Riley, I actually have a question for you later. My boutique's Wi-Fi is acting up again. Maybe you can look at it." "I'm not an electrician, Bella," I said, taking a bite of a burger that was burnt on the outside and raw in the middle. Frank slammed the tongs down. "Help your sister Riley. She's actually building something. She's got the entrepreneurial spirit, unlike some people who are content to stagnate. The insult was practiced a smooth stone they had thrown at me 1,000 times. I chewed slowly, forcing myself not to speak. If I spoke, I would scream. I would scream about the nights I slept under my desk to hit a launch deadline. I would scream about the Forbes article I had framed in my office, the one they would never see. I remembered my college graduation, scanning the crowd for them only to receive a text 3 hours later that they lost track of time at Bella's regional beauty pageant. They had missed me walking the stage to watch Bella come in third runner-up. They forgot my 25th birthday entirely, calling me 2 days later, only to ask if I could loan Bella $50 for gas. The sun began to dip, casting long, bruised shadows across the lawn. The neighbors drifted away, leaving only the core dysfunction of the Dawson clan. I stood up to leave, desperate to get back to the silence of my penthouse, but Frank caught my arm. His grip was tight, bordering on painful. "Not yet," he said, steering me toward the side of the garage, away from Mom and Bella. The air here smelled of gasoline and fertilizer. Frank's face shifted. The boisterous host was gone, replaced by the cold, calculating narcissist I knew too well. "Bella is expanding the boutique," he said, his voice low. "She's taking out a small loan to cover the new inventory. The bank needs a character reference, a co-signer of sorts, just for formalities." My stomach tightened. "Dad, my credit is terrible. You guys say it all the time. I barely make rent." I wasn't going to sign anything. I knew better. Frank's eyes narrowed, dark and shark-like in the gloom. He moved closer, using his height to intimidate me. "It's a formality, Riley. We just need a body, someone to put their name down so the underwriters tick a box." "No," I said, pulling my arm away. "I'm not signing a loan for a business that hasn't made a profit in 3 years. I won't do it." Frank stared at me for a long moment, his jaw working. He didn't yell. He didn't hit me. He did something worse. He looked at me with absolute, unvarnished disgust. "I don't know why I even asked," he hissed, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "You are a dead weight, Riley. You have no ambition, no loyalty, and no future. Get out of my sight. You're useless to us." He turned his back on me and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the dark, the word useless echoing in my ears like a gunshot. I walked back to the Honda, my hands shaking, not knowing that useless was exactly what they needed me to be, so they could steal the one thing I had protected from them, my name. 2 weeks later, the summons came. It wasn't an invitation. It was a command to appear at the family dining room, a space I had mentally christened the judgment seat. The air in the house was stale, smelling of lemon polish and unvoiced resentments. I sat at the mahogany table, my hands folded in my lap, looking at the tribunal. Frank sat at the head, his face a mask of simmering redness. Eleanor wouldn't look at me, her fingers shredding a paper napkin. Bella sat opposite me, scrolling through her phone, radiating a smug, untouchable boredom. I thought perhaps they were going to ask again for the signature I had refused at the barbecue. I was wrong. They weren't looking for a co-signer anymore. They were looking for a scapegoat to excise. "We're done, Riley," Frank began, his voice deceptively low, before it began to climb the decibel ladder. "We have carried you for years. We have tolerated your lack of direction, your refusal to integrate into this family's success, and your selfishness." I blinked, genuinely confused. "Carried me, Dad? I haven't taken a dime from you since I was 18. That was the wrong thing to say. Frank slammed his hand on the table, the silverware jumping in fright. "Don't you dare talk back to me. You act like a martyr because you pay your own rent on some rat-infested apartment. That's the bare minimum. Look at your sister. She's expanding. She's building a legacy. And you're an anchor." The speech spiraled. It was a greatest hits album of every insecurity I had ever suppressed. Eleanor chimed in, her voice trembling with a weaponized fragility. "We just can't watch you throw your life away anymore, Riley. It's too painful for us." Then came the crescendo. Frank stood up, his face purple, pointing a shaking finger at the front door. "You are a drain on our spirit. If you want to be a loser, go do it somewhere else. Get out of my house. Go live in the streets for all I care, but don't you dare come crawling back here when you starve." I didn't cry. Tears belong to people who have hope that the other person cares. Instead, a strange crystalline clarity descended over me. It was the feeling of a heavy pack being cut from my shoulders. "Okay," I said. My voice was steady, terrifyingly calm. I stood up, pushed my chair in, and walked out the front door without looking back. I got into the dented Honda Civic, drove it 5 miles to a used car lot, parked it in the drop-off lane, and tossed the keys into a metal trash can. I pulled out my phone, my real phone, and summoned an Uber Black. 20 minutes later, I was leaning back in leather seats watching the suburbs dissolve into the glittering steel canyons of downtown Chicago. When the driver pulled up to my private elevator entrance, I tipped him $100. I wasn't Riley the failure anymore. I was home. But the peace didn't last. A week later, my phone buzzed with an alert. It wasn't from my primary accounts or the offshore trusts holding my millions. It was from a dormant credit monitoring service I had signed up for in college and forgotten about. Suspicious activity detected on ending in 4409. I frowned. I didn't use a card ending in 4409. I logged in expecting a glitch. What I found was a rabbit hole that led straight to hell. I hired a forensic accountant immediately. His name was Marcus, a man who spoke in numbers and specialized in corporate espionage. Within 48 hours, he sat in my living room, a thick dossier on the glass coffee table between us. His expression was grim. "Riley," he said softly, "it's not just one card." We went through the pages. The betrayal wasn't recent, it was foundational. My parents hadn't just neglected me, they had cannibalized me. 7 years ago, when I was working 3 jobs, barista help desk tutor to pay my tuition, Frank and Eleanor had opened 3 credit cards in my name. The statements showed charges for university bursar. They had used my credit to pay for Bella's tuition. I had starved so they could steal my identity to educate the golden child. But it got worse. The loan Frank had tried to bully me into signing at the barbecue, he hadn't accepted my refusal. "Look at this," Marcus said, sliding a commercial lease agreement across the table. It was for a prime retail space in the Loop, Bella's new boutique location. The monthly rent was astronomical. At the bottom, next to Bella's loopy signature, was mine. It was a clumsy forgery, but good enough to fool a leasing agent eager for a commission. "You are personally the guarantor for a $500,000 liability," Marcus explained. "When this business fails and the financials show it is hemorrhaging money, the landlords will come for you. Your parents didn't just kick you out, Riley. They set a financial bomb in your pocket and waited for you to explode." I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city lights of Chicago sprawled out below me, a grid of amber and white. I felt a coldness spread through my chest, freezing the shock into something harder, sharper. They banked on me being a failure. They needed me to be poor, distracted, and beaten down, so I would never check my credit, never fight back, never notice the knife they had twisted between my ribs. They thought they were sending a stray dog to the streets. They had no idea they had just declared war on a titan. I picked up my phone and dialed my attorney. "Daniel," I said, my voice devoid of any warmth, "I don't want to just sue them." I looked at the reflection of the woman in the glass, powerful, wealthy, and utterly done with mercy. "I want to buy them." The Field Museum in Chicago is an imposing structure, a temple of limestone and history that makes everyone inside feel small. Tonight, however, it was a temple of capital. The Tech Horizons Charity Gala had transformed the main hall into a glittering sea of black ties, designer silk, and old money. Stanley, the massive T-Rex skeleton standing guard in the center, was bathed in deep violet, uplighting the color of royalty. I stood on the VIP mezzanine, obscured by the shadows of a marble pillar, watching the guests filter in below. I wasn't hiding because I was afraid. I was hiding because a predator waits until the prey is fully exposed before striking. I smoothed the fabric of my custom emerald gown. It was structured backless and cost more than the combined annual income of the 3 people I was currently tracking through the crowd. I had baited the trap 3 days ago. A random algorithm one I personally coded had selected Bella's Instagram account as the winner of 4 VIP tickets to the city's most exclusive networking event. I knew they wouldn't miss it. They were desperate. Bella needed an angel investor to save her sinking boutique, and Frank needed to feel important again after being forced into early retirement. And there they were. They stuck out like sore thumbs. Frank was tugging at the collar of a rented tuxedo that was a size too tight across the shoulders, his face already flushed with the promise of an open bar. Eleanor was wearing a dress that was too loud, a sequined blue number that screamed cruise ship rather than philanthropy. Bella clung to her arms, scanning the room with a hunger that was almost palpable, looking for anyone rich enough to exploit. I signaled my security detail, 2 men who looked like they were carved out of granite, to hang back. I wanted to do this part alone. I descended the grand staircase. The heavy silk of my train whispered against the stone steps. Heads turned. I saw whispers ripple through the crowd, people recognizing me not as Riley, the failure, but as the entity they had read about in Bloomberg. But my family didn't read financial news. They only read their own press clippings. I walked straight into their path near the Champagne Tower. Frank spotted me first. His reaction wasn't confusion. It was instant defensive aggression. He broke away from a confused waiter he had been cornering and marched toward me, grabbing my upper arm with a grip that bruised. "What the hell are you doing here?" he hissed, his voice a poisonous whisper. He looked around wildly, terrified that someone important might see us. "Did you sneak in? Are you working catering? Jesus, Riley, look at you. You're wearing a costume. Get back to the cloakroom before security throws you out and embarrasses us." Bella stepped up, sneering. "Seriously, Riley? You crashed my VIP night. This is for business owners, people who actually contribute to society. You look ridiculous." I didn't pull away. I just looked at Frank's hand on my arm, then up at his eyes. "Let go, Dad," I said, my voice cutting through the ambient jazz. "You're making a scene." "I'm making a scene." Frank's face went purple. "You're the one trespassing. I should have known you'd try to ruin this for Bella. You're jealous. You've always been jealous." He squeezed harder. "Leave, now, or I will drag you out myself." Suddenly, the house lights dimmed to black. A hush fell over the 3,000 guests. A spotlight hit the main stage under the T-Rex, and the massive projection screen suspended above the hall roared to life. Frank froze, his hands still clamping my arm, confused by the sudden shift in atmosphere. "Ladies and gentlemen," the voice of the host boomed, echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Tonight we are honored to present our title sponsor and the recipient of the Innovator of the Decade Award, a woman who built an empire from a laptop in a basement apartment, the architect of the AI revolution." Music swelled, a deep rhythmic bass that vibrated in the floorboards. On the screen's code cascaded like rain, forming complex logistical networks. Then the logo appeared, Dawson Logic. Frank's grip loosened. He blinked at the screen. "Dawson," he whispered, confused. That's our name." Then my face filled the 50-foot screen. It was a cover shoot from Wired magazine. The text overlay was massive: Riley Dawson, founder and CEO, net worth private. The air left Frank's lungs in a visible wheeze. His hand fell from my arm as if he had been burned. Eleanor let out a small, strangled squeak. Bella just stared, her mouth hanging open, the champagne glass in her hand, tilting dangerously. I stepped back, smoothing my arm where he had grabbed me. "I think they're calling my name," I said coolly. The spotlight swung through the darkness, searching until it hit me. The blindness was blinding, white and hot. The applause was a physical force, a thunderclap of validation that shook the room. I walked toward the stage, leaving my family paralyzed in the darkness of the floor. I didn't look back at them. I didn't need to. I could feel their world shattering. I took the microphone. I looked out at the sea of faces, and then I found them in the front row, illuminated by the spillover light. They looked small, shrunken, terrified. "Thank you," I said, my voice amplified to godlike proportions. People often ask me what drove me to build Dawson Logic. They assume it was passion or genius. I paused, letting the silence stretch. It was survival. I learned resilience from the people who told me I was worthless. I built my fortune because the people who were supposed to protect me told me to go live in the streets. I locked eyes with Frank. He was trembling. So I'd like to thank them. Without their cruelty, I never would have realized that I didn't need a safety net. I learned to fly because they pushed me off the cliff. The crowd erupted, thinking it was a metaphor. Frank, Eleanor, and Bella knew it wasn't. Frank started to lunge toward the stage, his face twisted in a rictus of fury and panic, perhaps to scream, perhaps to beg. He didn't make it 2 steps. My security team materialized from the shadows like wraiths. They didn't ask him to leave. They hoisted him by the armpits, dragging him and a screaming Eleanor backward toward the exit. Bella scrambled after them, tripping over her heels, humiliated. As the heavy doors swallowed them whole, I raised my champagne flute to the room, drinking in the sweet cold taste of absolute victory. The conference room on the 45th floor of Dawson Logic headquarters was designed to intimidate. It was a glass box suspended in the sky, sterile and cold, with a view of Chicago that reduced the people below to insignificant ants. The air conditioning hummed with a low, menacing thrum, the only sound in the room, as I sat at the head of a 30-foot table made of polished obsidian. It was 9:00 a.m. the morning after the gala. My lawyer Daniel stood silently by the door, a sentinel in a charcoal suit. On the table in front of me sat a single manila folder and a Mont Blanc pen. I wasn't waiting for family members. I was waiting for defendants. When the elevator doors slid open, they didn't walk in. They huddled. Frank, Eleanor, and Bella entered the room looking like refugees from a shipwreck. They were wearing yesterday's clothes, rumpled and stale. Frank's eyes were bloodshot, a mix of hangover and rage. Eleanor looked frail, her hands trembling as she clutched her purse. Bella stripped of her filters, and her confidence looked like a child caught shoplifting. They hesitated at the threshold, intimidated by the sheer sterile wealth surrounding them. They had expected perhaps a coffee shop or a living room somewhere they could yell, cry, and manipulate. Instead, they got a boardroom where sound went to die. "Sit," I said. I didn't gesture. I didn't smile. Frank bristled, his old instincts trying to override his current reality. "Don't you command me, Riley. You have a lot of explaining to do. That stunt last night." "Sit." I repeated, my voice dropping an octave. "Or leave. But if you leave, the sheriff's deputies currently waiting in the lobby will proceed with the eviction at noon today instead of tomorrow." That shut him up. They sat. The silence that stretched between us was thick enough to choke on. Frank shifted in his ergonomic leather chair, unable to get comfortable. "Eviction," he muttered. "The bank gave us 30 days on the notice we got this morning." "The bank sold the debt," I said, sliding the manila folder across the obsidian surface. It stopped perfectly in front of Frank. "To a holding company called RD Ventures. I own your mortgage, Dad. I own the lien on the house. I own the commercial lease on Bella's boutique. And I own the credit card debt you racked up in my name for 7 years. Frank opened the folder. Inside was what my forensic accountant called the shadow ledger. It was a comprehensive timeline of their theft. Every time they forged my signature, every credit line they opened to pay for Bella's tuition, her car, her failed business ventures. It was laid out in black and white, a roadmap of systematic predation. "This is," Frank sputtered, his face flushing a deep, dangerous red. "This is private family business. You went snooping, I went auditing," I corrected. "You committed felonies, wire fraud, identity theft, forgery. That's 15 years in federal prison, Dad, per count." I waited for the remorse. I waited for my mother to cry and say they were desperate, or for Bella to apologize for living off my stolen future. Instead, Frank slammed the folder shut. "We raised you," he shouted, his voice cracking. "We put a roof over your head. We fed you. That money was ours by right. You were hoarding it, hiding your success while your sister struggled. It was reimbursement for the years we spent tolerating you." Bella chimed in, her voice shrill and whining. "You have hundreds of millions, Riley, and you're mad about a few credit cards. You're so selfish. You could have just paid it off and we'd be fine. Why do you have to be so cruel?" I stared at them, feeling the last vestige of emotional tether snap. It was a clean break. They weren't sorry. They were incapable of being sorry. To them, I wasn't a person. I was a resource they had failed to fully exploit. "I'm not mad about the money," I said, my voice dead calm. "I make more in a week than you stole in a decade. I'm doing this because you tried to break me, and now I'm going to break you." I signaled Daniel. He stepped forward and placed 3 thick documents on the table. "The deal is simple," I said. "Option A, I hand this file to the FBI. You go to prison, all of you." Eleanor let out a sob. "Option B, you sign these documents. It's a full confession of your fraud and a strict non-disclosure agreement. You will admit to what you did. You will transfer the deed to the house to me immediately. You will dissolve the boutique, and you will never ever contact me or speak my name in public again." "You're taking the house," Eleanor whispered, horrified. "But where will we go?" "I don't know," I said, echoing the words Frank had screamed at me weeks ago. "Go live in the streets for all I care." Frank stood up so fast his chair toppled backward. The veins in his neck bulged. "You ungrateful, spiteful little brat," he roared. He lunged across the table, his hands reaching for my throat, desperate to squeeze the power back out of me. He didn't make it halfway. 2 security guards burst from the side doors, pinning him to the table face down in seconds. His cheek was pressed against the cold stone, his breath fogging the polished surface. I stood up slowly, towering over him. I looked down at the man who had terrified me my entire childhood, now just a pathetic, violent creature trapped in my web. "I'm not ungrateful, Frank," I said, using his first name for the first time. I picked up the pen and signed the eviction order right next to his face. "I'm just expensive, and you can no longer afford me." 6 months later, the silence was the first thing I noticed. Not the stifling, weaponized silence of my childhood home, where a dropped fork could trigger a 3-hour lecture on gratitude, but a wide, expansive silence that smelled of pine needles and damp earth. I stood in the kitchen of my new lake house in Wisconsin, watching the steam rise from a pot of mashed potatoes. It was Thanksgiving, a holiday I had spent the last decade dreading. Usually this day meant navigating the minefield of Frank's political rants and Eleanor's passive-aggressive comments about my weight or my marital status. Today, the only thing filling the air was the smell of roasting turkey sage stuffing and the faint sweet scent of burning hickory from the fireplace in the great room. I knew in the abstract way one knows the weather in a foreign country what my parents were doing right now. My forensic accountant, Marcus, who had become something of a protective uncle figure, kept tabs on them so I didn't have to. Frank and Eleanor were living in a 2-bedroom walk-up in a suburb that Frank would have previously sneered at. Their social standing had evaporated faster than their credit score. Despite the non-disclosure agreement, the scandal had leaked. Bella, unable to sever her dopamine loop with social media, had vague posted about betrayal and ungrateful siblings enough times that the internet sleuths connected the dots. The local country club didn't revoke Frank's membership. They just politely suggested he might be happier elsewhere. He wasn't. He spent his days arguing with customer service reps over cable bills he could barely afford. And Bella, the golden child, was finally learning the value of $1. She was working at a high-end retail chain in the city, folding the same designer denim she used to mock me for wearing. She was on her feet for 8 hours a day, smiling at rude customers who treated her like a servant. I didn't feel a thrill of sadistic joy thinking about it. I didn't feel much of anything at all. The hate had burned itself out, leaving behind a clean, ash-free surface. "Riley, do you need help with the gravy? I feel useless just drinking your wine." I turned to see Sarah, my assistant, standing in the doorway holding a glass of Pinot Noir. Behind her in the living room, I could hear the low rumble of laughter. It wasn't the performative laughter of the Dawson barbecue. It was genuine. My table wasn't set for people who shared my DNA. It was set for the people who shared my values. There was Daniel, my lawyer, who had fought for me like a pit bull, Marcus, who had uncovered the truth, my college roommate Jen, who had let me sleep on her couch when I was building the first version of my code, and the elderly couple from next door who had brought a green bean casserole simply because they wanted to be neighborly. This was my found family. They didn't care about my net worth, and they certainly didn't need me to fail to feel better about themselves. Gravy is under control, I smiled, stirring the pot. Go sit down, I'll be out in a minute. When the food was plated and the wine poured, I slipped out the back sliding glass door onto the sprawling cedar deck. The November air was crisp, biting at my cheeks, smelling of dead leaves and wood smoke. The sun was setting over the lake, painting the water in strokes of purple and bruised orange. It was beautiful, solitary, and mine. I pulled my phone from my pocket. It had buzzed 4 times in the last hour. I looked at the screen. Blocked caller. I knew who it was. It was Frank, or maybe Eleanor. The holidays always made narcissists sentimental, or perhaps they had finally realized that the silence I imposed was permanent. I stared at the notification. A year ago, seeing them call would have sent my heart rate into the triple digits. I would have felt the pull of obligation, the desperate childish hope that maybe this time they would apologize, maybe this time they would love me. But standing there wrapped in a cashmere cardigan, I bought with money they couldn't touch on a property they weren't allowed to visit, I realized something profound. Revenge hadn't been about taking their house. It hadn't even been about the money. Taking their assets was just a mechanism, a way to remove the weapons from their hands. The real victory was the indifference I felt right now. The American dream isn't just about accumulation. It is about the freedom to sever ties with tyranny, even when that tyranny shares your blood. I didn't hate them. I just didn't need them. I was no longer a character in their tragedy. I was the author of my own life. I swiped left on the notification, deleting the voicemail without listening to it. I blocked the number again just to be sure. Then I slid the phone into my pocket. Through the glass doors, I saw my friends raising a toast. The firelight danced on their faces, warm and inviting. They were waiting for me. Not for my money, not for my utility, but for me. I turned my back on the cold, dark lake and opened the door. The warmth of the house rushed out to meet me, enveloping me like a hug. I stepped inside and slid the door shut, locking it tight against the night. As the camera of my mind pulled back, retreating from the scene, the house stood firm on the edge of the water, a fortress of light built on a foundation of iron, while glowing steady and strong in the deepening dark. And so Riley Dawson closed the chapter on the family that tried to ruin her, finally embracing the well-deserved peace she had architected herself. If this story of betrayal, strength, and ultimate triumph resonated with you, hit the subscribe button and tell us what you would have done in Riley's place. We read every single comment of your thoughts. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Revenge Hour. We'll see you next time.